Hi, my name's Penny. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the books that I read in September. Now, I did already do a mid-month wrap-up, which turned out to be like a 20-minute video because I read way too much stuff. So today I'm just gonna very briefly mention the books that I talked about in the first half of the month, and if you want to know more details, I'll link to that video. And I did also include timestamps in that video, so if you want to link to a specific book, you can. But today I will mainly focus on the books that I read in the second half of the month, which is 6 of the 18 books that I read this month. So the first half of this month was kind of crazy. Second half was just good. So the books, let's talk about the books. So firstly, physical books, I read Blood Red by Mercedes Lackey, which I've already talked about. It was okay, but not amazing. Then I read Binti, the Night Masquerade, which is the third book in the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor. I really enjoyed that series. I thought it was really strange and magical, even though it's a science fiction. They're really short books, so I definitely recommend them. I also read Small Spaces by Sarah Epstein, which is like a YA thriller. And actually, in my review, I said that I haven't read many YA thrillers, and I realized that that's entirely not true, because when I was a teenager, like a young teen, like 13, I used to go through point thrillers like nobody's business. I was just constantly reading point thrillers from the library. So I guess I actually have read a lot of thrillers. I would say that this was a lot better than any YA thrillers I've read before, and I really recommend it, even though it was kind of scary. Then lastly, for the ones that I read in the first half of the month, was Snapshot by Sanderson. Of course, it's Brandon Sanderson, so I loved it. And it was much more science fiction-y than most of the stuff I've read from him, which has been very fantasy oriented. Okay, then second half of the month books. Firstly, I read Magic Bleeds by Ilona Andrews. So this is the fourth, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the fourth book from the Kate Daniels series, which I'm rereading. The 10th book has actually just been released, but I haven't got my hands on it yet, which is okay, because I'm only up to the fourth book in the reread, and it's going to take me a little while to catch up. And I definitely want to reread this whole series before reading that last book. I've been really loving this reread. I love all the characters, so it's so cool seeing them all get introduced again, and just remembering what it was like to meet them in the first place. Also seeing Kate learn to develop relationships and friendships, because she's been raised with this idea that eventually she's going to kill her father, who's like this super magical overlord guy, and she's been taught that any relationships or friendships are weaknesses, and she's now kind of being put in a situation where she's developing these friendships and trying to figure out how to make that work. This particular book, the fourth one, is where it kind of starts getting her involved in her family dramas and building up towards that eventual confrontation with her father. I really loved it. I just go through these books so quickly. I'm so excited to read the next book and just reread the whole series and then read the last one. So if you haven't read this series, then please read this series. It's so great. Then the next physical book I read was City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. So this is a middle grade book about a girl named Cassidy who can essentially go through the veil and see ghosts. And she ends up going to Edinburgh, where there are a lot of ghosts. I did post, maybe, I don't know what I'm going to do in the future in terms of posting things, but I did film a reading diary about this. Haven't edited it, don't know how well it's going to work out, but I've got a lot of my thoughts there, so I'll definitely post that, and then I will link that somewhere around here. In general, I found it really enjoyable, but maybe a little bit simple. Then the last physical book I read, I just finished today, and it is a non-fiction book. It is called How to Sleep Well: The Science of Sleeping Smarter, Living Better, and Being Productive by Dr. Neil Stanley. I have to say with this book, it was not good. I gave it 1 star on Goodreads. So this book, it says it's going to have science in it, very little science, a lot of opinion. A lot of that opinion, very sexist. Like, I just never expected that my criticism of this book would be that it is sexist, but it's sexist. And as I was reading it, I was like, I bet this is like an old white guy. And then I looked him up. Old white guy, just as I expected. And it's just really condescending. Pretty much all the way through the book, he is criticizing people who think that they need sleep experts to get control of their sleep if they're not someone who has like a proper sleeping disorder. And given that most people who pick up this book are going to be the kind of people that he's insulting, it just seems like a really dumb thing to do and just so condescending. And then at the end of it, there is in fact very little actual advice. There's some good content in here, but it's a little bit hard because he mixes in like actual facts with so much opinion, and he doesn't necessarily make it clear what's fact and what's opinion, so you don't really know, can you really believe anything that's in this book? There's very few tips in here about actually how to sleep well or better. The only thing I really got out of it that wasn't something that's like obvious and I already know is that because I'm more of a night owl, when I get up I should try to get some sunlight as soon as possible. That's the only tip in this whole book that I think is worth knowing. Well, like everything else is just make sure that you're comfortable, make sure that you're relaxed, and then lots of insults about if you're not doing that then you're an idiot. So I don't recommend that book. I think I said this last time, but if you do have any book recommendations about how to sleep better that aren't condescending and sexist, then I would love to hear them. Please leave them down in the comments. So then in the second half of the month, I didn't read any new graphic novels, but I had read quite a few in the first half of the month. So I read the second book in the Umbrella Academy series by Gerard and Gabriel, which is called Dallas. I'm a little bit confused about how I feel. There were aspects I really liked, but a lot just went over my head. Talk more about it in my mid-month wrap-up. Then I also read Locke and Key volumes 5 and 6. I absolutely rave about it in my mid-month wrap-up. I love that series so much. I also read I Killed Giants by Joe Kelly, which was alright, nothing amazing, but it was okay. Very similar to the movie, which is why I read it, because I'd watched the movie and I wanted to compare the two. Then audiobooks. So I read 3 audiobooks in the second half of the month, but in the first half of the month I read It's Not Always Depression by Hilary Jacobs Hendel. You can see I'm reading it here. That was good. I actually have, like at the time I wasn't that sure whether it was that useful, but I have found it useful to think through some things since then, and so I think it actually was useful. Again, I probably could have read a blog about the content rather than listening to a whole book, but it's an audiobook and I listened to it in the car, so didn't really lose any time there. I also read Holacracy by Brian J. Robertson, which is a book about organizational structures and hierarchies, and I really enjoyed it. More info. As I say all the time, more info in my other video. And I read Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury, which was a book about negotiations. It had a lot of good information in it, but I think it's the kind of book for me that I need to absorb visually, because to be honest, now that it's been a little while since I listened to it, I don't really remember anything from it. So those are the ones that I read in the first half of the month. Then in the second half of the month, firstly I read The Outcasts of Order by Modesitt Jr. So that's the 20th book in the Saga of Recluce series, and that means that I'm now caught up in the series, which I'm a little bit conflicted about because I'm really glad to have that series kind of like finished for now. I don't know that there's much to say about the 20th book. It was good because there wasn't so much war. So my main criticism of the 19th book was that there was a lot of war and like battle tactics, and it's just really boring for me. Whereas the Outcasts of Order was a lot more about him moving away, although it was a little bit frustrating because he ends up marrying the first girl that got mentioned in the 19th book. And it's just such a ridiculous, like, in his books, every time the main character meets a girl and kind of thinks she's pretty, guess what? They're gonna get married. And it's just so unrealistic and frustrating. But anyway, there was a bunch of stuff about him kind of moving around and trying to find a place where he belongs. He doesn't quite end up where he belongs because there's going to be another book following the same character. But overall, for a Saga of Recluce book, it was quite enjoyable. But as I was saying, I'm glad I finished that series, but now it's a little bit hard because before I've always had these audiobooks for like the whole year. I've been listening to this series on audiobooks. And so I've always had an audiobook that I could be listening to, whereas now I have to start actually finding audiobooks that I want to listen to. And it's not always that easy because I find a lot of the audiobooks that are available on Overdrive are ones that I would rather read in physical form, so I've spent a lot of time scrolling looking for books, which is annoying. And I do have quite a lot on hold, but it takes time waiting for them to come through. So that said, the last 2 books that I listened to on audiobook this month were ones that I pretty much just picked up because they were available at the time and I needed something to listen to, and I got bored of scrolling through, so I was just like, okay, I'm gonna read these ones. So there was one non-fiction one and one fiction one. The non-fiction one was How to Make People Like You in 90 Seconds or Less. Now, this isn't really something that I particularly worry about, but I thought it might have some useful content in it. To be honest, not really. It maybe helped me understand maybe why there are certain people that I don't get along with as easily. It did have this really interesting concept about people being either visual, auditory, or I don't know, touch people. I can't remember what the actual phrase he used was. And about being able to identify what type of person someone is from the language they used. And I thought it sounded like a really amazing concept. But when I actually tried to apply it in real life, like I paid attention to the words that people were using, and I've decided that I think it's probably actually bullshit. But it was an interesting thing to read about. Anyway, it was very short, I think like 3 hours or something, so it kind of kept me entertained for my commute for a little bit. Then the last book that I listened to this month was Every Last Lie by Mary Kubica. Is that how you say it? I think that's how you say it. So this is a thriller about a woman who's just had a baby and then her husband dies in a car crash, and then through both her perspective in the current time and his perspective in the past time, it kind of reveals that he perhaps wasn't completely honest with her. But I have to say, in the end, like, the ending, the reveal was so disappointing, and I really hated the main character. The husband was okay, but then he started lying to her and just making all these really stupid decisions, and it was just quite frustrating. But through most of the book I thought, well, there's going to be this really good reveal, so it's worth putting up with this annoying mother type character and this stupid husband and this relationship that just talk to each other. Just talk to each other. But I thought it would be worth it for the reveal, and then the reveal was a disappointment, so yeah, not the best. So those are all the books I read for the month. It's quite a lot of books, so I'm pretty happy. There were a couple in there that I really loved, even if there were also a couple that I really didn't like. It all balances out in the end. If you have read any of the books I just talked about, I'd love to talk to you about them down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.